Hello, Pet World, and welcome to another edition of Natural Pets TV. I'm Robert Semro, and I am joined by two experts in the natural pet world. I've got Greg Tilford to my right, Heidi Nevala to my left, and we're going to continue the discussion today about the roles of herbs in daily maintenance and how to properly use them. But before we dive into that, one of the questions I get regularly as I'm out at the different expos and meeting with folks is, who do I trust? How do I get on that path? When it comes to herbs, there are some great resources out there that were not there before. Who would you recommend they turn to?
Well, there's a growing community of holistic veterinarians that are specifically trained in Western or traditional Chinese medicines and all kinds of different herbs. And a good place to look would be at the website of the American Holistic Veterinary Medical Association, ahvma.org. And the cool thing about that website is all of the members, which it's about 700 or 800 people, vets listed there, but they list the practitioners state by state throughout the United States, and also list them by what sort of therapies they have expertise in, whether it be acupuncture, puncture, herbs, etc. So it's a really good place to look, and I highly recommend finding out who the holistic practitioners are near you and starting from that standpoint. Sure. The other way is if you have a company or a supplements company that you trust and you've heard good things about, there's no reason you shouldn't pick up the phone and say, hey, do you work with any good practitioners that I can consult and talk with? Because we work with them all the time, and in my efforts as an herbalist, I'm a formulator. I'm not a practitioner. I'm a teacher. I teach to a lot of vets, but I'm not a vet. Sure. And I know a lot of people, and so my company knows a lot of people, and they know me, and and there's a lot of us out there. There's a lot of people like me out there, and it's a growing community. So find the expert or find the vet. Sure. Usually it's one and the same.
I know you get involved with some of it, but where do you turn to, and where would you suggest the regular pet parents turn to get this kind of information? Because it's important.
Well, I agree with everything you said, especially there's a lot more participation now at a holistic vet level, but conventional vets are also beginning to embrace what they maybe no longer call alternative, but maybe complementary therapies with herbal medicine or herbs, nutritional foods, however you want to term it. You could also talk to pet professionals who are either behavioralists or trainers. I mean, they do have access to information too that's different, but it's complementary in terms of what it could do for animal wellness.
Sure, and I think the most important thing that I want to make sure everybody out there gets is talk to people, talk to different people. Talk to a vet. If you aren't understanding what they're saying, then talk to a different vet. Not because you don't like what they're saying, but because maybe they're not connecting with you in the way that you need them to connect. Right. Because they all have different approaches. You've got to find the right approach that fits you, your lifestyle, and your pet and their lifestyle.
And your comfort levels,
yes.
Which is important. I consider myself a skeptic on herbal medicine. I want to feel comfortable in what I recommend and what I do. And one thing you should know is that the holistic vets we're talking about are veterinarians. They're trained in the same schools as every other veterinarian. They've just chosen to use natural modalities in their clinic. Most of them do have integrative practices in which they employ conventional medicine alongside the holistic or natural modalities that they also have adopted. And oftentimes they've integrated those things very, very effectively using the best of both worlds. A good example is I know many vets that utilize steroid drugs in conjunction with things like licorice root, which actually potentiates the effect and lengthens the half-life in the body, if you will, of corticosteroid drugs. That's the theory. And they claim that they can reduce those steroid drugs, which might otherwise be harmful to the liver if used in mid or long term, by incorporating herbs like licorice, and literally potentiating. So, it also brings up a point that it's not always a bad thing for an herb to go into the body and make a drug stronger. Right. If you don't know what you're doing, that could be dangerous, but in the hands of these practitioners, they're doing things with a pretty wide margin of success in many cases.
And they're also starting, like you said, they're blending the synthetics with the medicinal herbs, and they're sometimes replacing too. So that's part of what we're going to be discussing is in terms of remedial products. and with good success. There is a lot of research that is done outside of this country, TCM included, South American traditional medicine, on the functionality of a plant, what it does in animals and people. So that's another thing to get back to the research part of it. Where do you go? There is a lot of research, but you might have to do some digging or contact a company that's done the research or participated in research trials.
Right.
So it doesn't necessarily guarantee you'll be comfortable, but it'll lend some credibility when you can do third-party searches for the research.
So, I mean, the important thing too, not to interrupt you there, but is that there are a lot of resources, quality resources out there now that we didn't have in the past. But it's incumbent, as we've been talking about in the show on a regular basis, for you to take charge of that and to get involved and to go out and access that information, ask the right questions, be keeping track of what's going on so that you can provide experts what it is that they need to know to properly advise you. And once you start that process, to give them the feedback on what you're seeing and observing. Nobody knows your pet better than you do. I want to talk about remedial herbs. Explain that for the folks.
To me, I kind of differentiate. There's classes of herbs that, as I mentioned in a previous episode, that strengthen what the body's just naturally designed to do for itself. And then there's remedial herbs that go beyond that, more like in a drug-like effect, to create an immediate change similar to what we would consider a drug. And some of them really, honestly, are what we would consider plant drugs. But they should only be used to remedy a situation and not used long-term. It's not so much in every case that it will be toxic or dangerous. It's just, for instance, with the case of valerian root, which is known as it's actually the best known calming agent in the herbal realm in North America. And it can be used to take the nervous edge off animals. But if it's used every day for behavioral issues, the body will just gain well, not a dependency, but a tolerance to it, and you won't see the effects anymore. So it's used.
Great point.
It's used to remedy what I call an acute anxiety problem, thunderstorms, trips to the groomer, stuff like that. But if your dog's bouncing off the walls, it's funny. It's a funny story. If I have a minute,
You have two.
I got two. Somebody in my audience years ago said, "I've got this dog, and he's got behavioral problems, and he's chewing everything up. He's tearing up the furniture. He's bouncing off the walls. He's chasing the cat all over the house. And is there anything I can give him on a daily basis just to bring him down into even his mood out?" And I said, "How old is your dog?" She said, "Well, he's 8 weeks."
Oh.
So
Am I?
you can remedy things, but there's a good point there too. Is behavioral issues are in different.
Sure.
Thing.
Right.
And with regard to what you were talking about earlier with the good information with research, and this is for the skeptics out there again, because as a speaker and an expert in this field, I get the question all the time, how do you validate things? There's no scientific validation for the use of these herbs in animals. Well, that's not true. The truth is I could show you stacks 10 feet high of research that involves herb constituents that were done in various countries by high institutions of high learning. And most of them were done, if not all of them, in pursuit of developing a new drug. The problem is that the political and economic system in this country says, if that study is not directed for the use of a drug that's to be used in animals, we're not going to accept it for use in animals. And second, if it's a study that came from outside the United States,
Right.
we'll disallow it too. The truth is, and to my frustration, there's a lot of information, scientific validation for herbal constituents that we're not allowed to use.
Well, I think one of the other things too that's come up, and I've heard you both mention this in this episode, is there are different types of herbs as well. And so we've got North American, we've got South American, we've got traditional Chinese medicine. There is a lot of overlapping in terms of what they can help address, but also to your point on the studies, the research, and you can extrapolate what you want and what you will from it, but it's not something that's voodoo. This is well established out there.
Absolutely.
And so, again, for all of you out there who are looking at how do I use herbs properly, I think one of the important points that you brought up too is understanding the herb that you're using. And I know we've all had those discussions.
And you don't have to pick up a tome of a book with 400 herbs in it and learn all of them.
Herb for Pets by Greg Tilford?
Herb for Pets, right. Learn about 2 or 3 really common herbs, and in an episode coming up, I'm sure we'll be talking about what's in your kitchen cabinet. But just pick 2 or 3, get to know them very well, understand what they can do, what they cannot do, and just one at a time. You don't have to know everything, and nobody does. I mean, I'll tell you what, the more I think I know, the more I realize I have a lot more to learn. And it never ends. There's no such thing as mastery in my mind.
Right.
There's
And
no absolute.
we've talked about the bio-individuality as well. So just because it works for one of your dogs in the household doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for your other dog as well. So we've got to keep track of all of that. We've got to be working with the experts. Folks, I want to thank you for joining us here on Natural Pets TV. Financial and other considerations have been provided by Animal Essentials, Natura Petz Organics, the National Animal Supplement Council, and the Well Dog Place. Hey pet parents, thanks for joining us. I got to say, we are covering a lot of great topics, but I want to hear from all of you. What things do you want our experts to be talking about, educating, and sharing with you? Put that in the comments section down below. In the meantime, if you want more information about my good friend Greg Tilford, you can get that at theanimalherbalist.com or at animalessentials.com, or from my other good friend Heidi Nevala, visit naturapets.com. And as always, you can find us at petworldinsider.com.